This is Stephen Lewis. The purpose of this brief video is to introduce you to histology and its application to the human body. We can divide the human body into simpler parts. For example, the human body can be divided into 11 systems. Shown here is the digestive system. Each system is composed of simpler units called organs. The stomach is an organ of the digestive system. Organs are composed of different tissues. Tissues, in turn, are composed of cells and cellular secretions. Cells can be subdivided into specialized regions called organelles, or little organs. We can further divide the cell into the chemical levels, which include macromolecules like proteins and nucleic acids, and small molecules like water and glucose. Molecules are composed of atoms of the different elements, such as carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. Our focus in this video will be the tissue level of organization. Histology is the study of the tissues that compose the organs of our bodies. We usually classify different tissues in the body into one of four major types. Each type of tissue has special functions. Epithelial tissues line surfaces and secrete. Connective tissues bind and support. Muscle tissues contract. And nerve tissues communicate and control. Let's do an analysis of the wall of the heart in terms of the dominant tissue layers that compose it. Here we've removed a section of the heart wall. The outer layer of the heart is an epithelium. Beneath the epithelium is connective tissue. Next, we encounter a thick layer of cardiac muscle tissue, which contracts to generate a force to circulate the blood. Beneath the cardiac muscle tissue is more connective tissue. Lining the internal surface of the heart is another layer of epithelium. Within the chambers of the heart is blood, which is classified as a connective tissue. Penetrating the wall of the heart is nerve tissue, permitting the nervous system to influence the rate and strength of heart contraction. We can do a similar analysis of virtually any organ in the human body. In this video, we will focus on epithelial and connective tissues. Let's begin with epithelia. Wherever we find a free surface in the body, we find an epithelium. This includes the outer surface of organs, such as the skin, and the internal surface of organs, such as the heart. Epithelia also secrete substances to the surface of the body or to the bloodstream. For example, our digestive glands are composed of epithelia that secrete to the surface of the GI tract to help us digest our food. Our sweat glands secrete to the surface of our skin to cool the body. Other epithelia produce chemical messengers called hormones that are secreted to the bloodstream. Epithelial tissues are composed of tightly packed cells with very little extracellular material, or matrix. Epithelia are avascular, meaning they do not contain blood vessels. Consequently, when you scratch your skin, you may see and feel the scratch, but you may not bleed. We classify epithelia based on the dominant shape of its cells and the number of cell layers. There are three major cell shapes found in epithelia. Squamous epithelia are dominated by flattened cells. Cuboidal epithelia contain mostly dice-shaped cells. columnar epithelia are composed mostly of pillar-shaped cells. A second criteria for classifying epithelia is its number of cell layers. A simple epithelium contains a single layer of cells. A stratified epithelium contains many layers of cells. The more layers of cells in an epithelium, the more protection it can provide. We label the different kinds of epithelia based on the dominant cell shape and the number of cell layers. The most basic type of epithelium is a simple squamous epithelium, a single layer of flat cells. When you look down on a simple squamous epithelium, you see what looks like a plate of fried eggs. The dark blue region is the nucleus of each cell. A simple squamous epithelium does not offer much protection, but it does allow for ready diffusion of substances from one compartment to another. For example, the air sacs of the lungs, called alveoli, and the wall of the blood capillaries are each composed of a simple squamous epithelium. This permits rapid gas exchange between the alveoli and the bloodstream. A simple cuboidal epithelium is a single layer of cube-shaped cells. The tubules inside the kidneys are lined with this kind of epithelium. The lumen of the tubule is the free surface. The ovaries of the female are also lined with a simple cuboidal epithelium. A simple columnar epithelium is composed of a single layer of tall cells. We find this type of epithelium on the luminal surface of the digestive tract facing your lunch from the stomach through the rectum. The simple columnar epithelium that lines the small intestine contains folds in its cell membranes on the luminal surface. These folds increase the surface area of the small intestine to maximize contact with the food for digestion and absorption. As a result, the luminal surface of the small intestine is often called the brush border. Pseudo-stratified columnar epithelium appears to contain more than one layer of cells. However, the cells all have a common baseline, although many cells do not reach the free surface. Consequently, this epithelium is labeled pseudo-stratified. Note also the presence of secretory cells called goblet cells, which produce a sticky substance called mucus that's released to the free surface. The goblet cells fill with mucus and begin to resemble a goblet. Then they release the mucus to the surface, where it seals in moisture and protects against infection. Note that the luminal surface of this epithelium also contains hair-like projections called cilia. Cilia are different from microvilli in that their purpose is to sweep debris along the surface. Cilia sweep, microvilli increase surface area for absorption. Pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium is often called respiratory epithelium because it is present along the free surface of much of the respiratory tract, where it helps to sweep debris away from the lungs. A ciliated epithelium is also found in the proximal end of the male reproductive tract, where it sweeps along immature sperm. The uterine tubes of the female contain a ciliated simple columnar epithelium. Here, the sperm have to swim against the sweeping action of the cilia, whose function is to sweep the egg towards the uterus. Stratified squamous epithelium may be composed of 30 to 50 layers of mostly flattened cells, where we need maximum protection. The deeper layer of cells may be cuboidal or columnar, but as the cells are pushed to the surface, they flatten. There are two major types of stratified squamous epithelium: moist and dry. The moist kind is found lining the oral cavity, the surface of the esophagus or food tube, along the vagina, the anal canal, and the distal end of the urethra. The dry kind is also called keratinized because these cells produce a water-insoluble protein called keratin. We find keratinized stratified squamous epithelium almost exclusively in the outer layer of the skin, a layer called the epidermis. In this photo, the epidermis has been stained red. Note that on the surface, the cells are dead and flaking off. Their death is a result of cells getting pushed away from their blood supply and source of nourishment. This dead layer of cells helps to seal moisture in the body and prevent entry of foreign substances through the surface. Transitional epithelium is also known as uroepithelium because it's found within the urinary tract. Transitional epithelium implies this tissue can exist in two extreme states. When the urinary bladder is distended with urine, its lining resembles a stratified squamous epithelium. When the bladder is empty, this same epithelium resembles a stratified oval epithelium. On a slide, you most likely will see this epithelium resembling a stratified oval epithelium. Connective tissues differ from epithelium in that they tend to have fewer cells and more extracellular material called matrix. Most connective tissues also have a blood supply, so if you cut through the epithelium of the epidermis to the connective tissues below, you will bleed. Collagen is the most abundant protein in the human body. It comprises nearly a third of all protein in our bodies. Collagen is an extracellular fibrous protein that helps hold us together. If we cannot produce collagen, we come unglued. We literally fall apart. We develop a disease called scurvy. Thousands of sailors throughout history have died of scurvy, which for many years was thought to be a sexually transmitted disease. Later it was discovered that scurvy was in fact a nutritional deficiency disease. In the 20th century, we discovered the missing nutrient was vitamin C. Sailors on long voyages were so susceptible to scurvy because of the difficulty transporting fresh fruits and vegetables that are the primary sources of vitamin C. Loose fibrous connective tissue, which is also known as areolar connective tissue, contains relatively few cells and lots of matrix. The fibers in the matrix are relatively few, and they go in every which direction, so there's lots of flexibility to this type of connective tissue. We find loose fibrous connective tissue in the dermis of the skin, especially in the outer dermis, called the papillary layer. We also find areolar tissue beneath the skin in what's called the hypodermis, or subcutaneous layer. We find loose fibrous connective tissue within and between muscles. Dense fibrous connective tissue has many more fibers than loose fibrous connective tissue. There are two major types of dense fibrous connective tissue. In regularly arranged dense fibrous connective tissue, fibers pretty much all go in the same direction. In irregularly arranged dense fibrous connective tissue, the fibers go in every which direction. The difference between irregularly arranged and regularly arranged dense fibrous connective tissues is like the difference between your hair when you first get up in the morning and after you comb it. Dense fibrous connective tissues are stronger than loose fibrous. Regularly arranged is the stronger of the two. We find regularly arranged dense fibrous connective tissue making up the tendons that anchor muscles to bones and ligaments that anchor bones to bones, and also within the sclera, or the white of the eye. Irregularly arranged dense fibrous connective tissue is found extensively in the deeper layer of the dermis of the skin, called the reticular layer. This is the layer that is used to make leather products. It's strong but flexible. We also find irregularly arranged dense fibrous connective tissue forming organ capsules and joint capsules. These are bags that surround organs as well as movable joints. Probably the most hated type of connective tissue is fat connective tissue, which is more technically referred to as adipose connective tissue. Adipose is the Latin word for fat. The Greek word for fat is lipos, from which we get lipid. On the left, you're viewing an actual photograph of fat connective tissue. Note that all you're seeing are the carcasses or remains of cells. On the right, you see an artist view showing cells that contain fat. Notice the nucleus of the cells may be pushed to the plasma membrane by all the fat that's contained within the cells. Adipose connective tissue isn't all bad. It can protect organs. For example, we have a fat pad around our kidneys that protects and secures the kidneys. We have a fat layer around our heart and in back of our eyes. If you lose a lot of fat, your eyes may appear sunken as a result. Fat tissue also serves as the primary means of energy storage for the body, so that if our diet is deficient in energy, we can break down stored fat and use that fat for fuel. Compact bone connective tissue is found in the outer wall of bones of the skeletal system. Here you're viewing the proximal end of a bone called the femur. The outer layer of the bone has been magnified, and this is what you would see under a microscope. Notice it looks a lot like the trunk of a tree that's been sawed open. You see a series of concentric rings around a central canal. In those concentric rings, you see dark spots called lacunae, or little lakes. These lacunae are where we find living bone cells called osteocytes. Compact bone connective tissue is one of the toughest tissues in the body. In our skeleton, we have need in many places for more flexibility than can be provided by bone. At those places, we may find cartilage instead of bone. Cartilage is a Latin term. The Greek word for cartilage is chondros, from which we get chondrocytes, which are cells that inhabit cartilage. If you have cartilage in your food, we call it gristle, an old English term. Here you're looking at the cartilage of the rib cage, shown in blue. The costal cartilage allows the rib cage to expand and recoil as we breathe. We also find cartilage in our external ears, our external nose, and the lining of our movable joints, where it serves as a kind of Teflon coating protecting the bony surfaces. Unlike most connective tissues, cartilage is largely avascular, meaning it has no direct blood supply, and consequently, if damaged, it may take a long time to heal or may have to be surgically repaired. We can consider blood to be both an organ as well as a type of connective tissue, depending upon the level of organization. When you view a blood smear under a microscope, you see mostly red blood cells. 99% of all the cells in the blood are red blood cells. These red cells, or erythrocytes, are responsible for the red appearance of the blood. The matrix of blood is a liquid called plasma. About 55% of the volume of our blood is plasma, also known as the extracellular fluid of the blood. Now let's look briefly at the other two kinds of tissues, muscle tissue and nervous tissue. Muscle tissue is specialized for contraction and comes in three major types: skeletal, cardiac, and smooth. Here you're looking at skeletal muscle tissue, which is the dominant tissue within the skeletal muscles of the body. Skeletal muscle tissue is composed of cylindrical and striped cells known as fibers. Skeletal muscle cells usually contain many nuclei, reflecting that they are the fusion of many precursor cells. Be careful not to confuse skeletal muscle tissue with dense, fibrous connective tissue regularly arranged. Nerve tissues are used to communicate, control, and store information. Nerve tissues are found throughout the body, but are especially abundant within the brain and spinal cord. Be careful not to confuse nerve tissue with loose, fibrous connective tissue. Those threads you see in nerve tissue are not protein fibers, but processes off the cell bodies of neurons that reach out to communicate with other cells. Let's take a tour of the integumentary system, looking at the different kinds of tissues we would encounter on a trip from the surface to the deeper layers. The outermost layer of the integument is called the epidermis. The epidermis is classified histologically as a stratified, keratinized, squamous epithelium. As an epithelium, it has no direct blood supply, so the outer layer of cells are dead because they've been pushed away from their source of nourishment. Deep to the epidermis is the dermis. There are two major connective tissue layers to the dermis. The outer layer, known as the papillary layer, is composed of mostly loose, fibrous connective tissue, also known as areolar connective tissue. The deeper, thicker layer of the dermis, known as the reticular layer, is primarily composed of dense, fibrous connective tissue irregularly arranged. The epidermis and dermis make up what we call the skin. Beneath the skin is a region known as the hypodermis, or subcutaneous layer. The hypodermis is typically a combination of loose fibrous connective tissue and adipose connective tissue. We can estimate how much adipose connective tissue, or fat, is in a person by measuring the thickness of their integument at various locations. The fatter you are, the thicker your hypodermis. I hope you enjoyed our tour of the tissues.